My name is Anders Helquist from the Weld Riley Law Firm in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And, we appreciate you having a public hearing. This ordinance unfortunately creates and makes more problems than it solves. The ordinance has multiple flaws, and if passed, it can be voidable. But quite simply, it's not the constructive way to address the issues that you've heard from folks. I represent, in addition to riparian owners or lake owners in the town, businesses. I also represent townships. I represent municipalities. I've advised boards like yours. And that's the perspective I'm coming from with my experience doing this for over 16 years. Again, 2 weeks ago, my firm did make a public records request, and we still don't have those records heading into this hearing. And that creates a due process issue that we're concerned with. Public hearings are for everyone to have the facts so they can comment intelligently and properly. Unfortunately, we don't have all the facts before this public hearing. Before we get this ordinance, when I'm advising townships or other municipalities, I say, don't pass an ordinance unless you can enforce it. Otherwise, what good is that? DNR wardens across the state have looked at the identical ordinance that you folks have, or that you're looking to propose. It's the same ordinance that Richard Phillips has drafted up and is passed around in a copy and paste job around the state. Here's what 3 different wardens have told me, or have told other town clerks. One warden told the town clerk, quote, "These ordinances are extremely difficult, if not nearly impossible, to enforce," end quote. Another warden emailed another town chair and said, quote, "Wake ordinances are already nearly impossible for law enforcement to effectively enforce." Another DNR warden said he'd get, quote, "laughed out of court," end quote, if he tried to write a citation based on the Wapaka chain ordinance, which is basically identical to what you have in front of you. These unenforceable ordinances create dangerous situations where private citizens then try to enforce the ordinance that the town can't or is unable to enforce. These private citizens drive up dangerously to people that are moving slowly on their wake boats. They cut them off. They go next to the wake surfers. They create a more dangerous situation than the wake surfers do. The DNR's boating law administrator is on the record in a newspaper article. He said if those private citizens are trying to enforce the town's ordinance, quote, "that's a Fourth Amendment violation if I've ever seen one," end quote. This unenforceable ordinance creates dangerous situations and liability. I'm not just talking about the town, I'm talking about the folks that will feel empowered and will try to enforce this privately because the town can't. The unlicensed attorney that is giving you guys legal advice,
No personal taxes.
he's unlicensed, correct?
No personal tax. Hey, my meeting, okay? It's for the public. You can read his bio, you can read his bio online. We're not gonna have a difference here, okay?
I understand.
Thank you.
He said, quote, "No state laws apply to wake surfing," end quote. That's untrue. That's bad advice. There are already enforceable state laws that apply to those dangerous situations that you've encountered, whether it's with a wake boat or a jet ski or somebody getting too close and operating a boat in an unsafe manner. Those are already prohibited by state law. A DNR warden can enforce that. The sheriff's department can enforce those laws. These worst case scenarios of a dangerous wave going too close to someone else's boat because they're operating it unsafely, that's enforceable. those are citable offenses under existing state law. You keep hearing that, well, you have every right and you have a crystal clear right to pass this. That is untested. The laws and the ordinances that are being passed around, that are the copy and paste jobs, are untested. Mr. Phillips already said they haven't been challenged in court yet. He said 0 times towns have been sued. Unfortunately, it's a special interest outside group that's pushing a lot of laws that are untested. The ordinance's outright prohibitions and bans exceed the town's authority under state law. Chapter 30 allows certain restrictions. It does not authorize outright prohibitions and bans. You will not see prohibit and ban in Chapter 30 for these types of ordinances. You'll see restrict, but you will not see prohibit or ban. And you cannot pass an ordinance that exceeds the authority that the legislature has given the township. This ordinance is overbroad, as we've heard from many that live on larger lakes. And I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with Rooney Lake that much. So, but on these larger lakes, doing the outright prohibition again is overbroad, and that outright ban not only violates the authority that you have under Chapter 30, but there are serious public trust doctrine concerns here. And that public trust doctrine holds that the state, it's a constitutional doctrine in Wisconsin, and says the state holds navigable waters in trust for the public, and these waters, quote, shall be common highways and forever free. What is banned by this ordinance and what is still allowed is arbitrary and capricious. That doesn't hold up under court scrutiny. An outright ban is also just not a proper balancing of the interests. It's not a compromise. And I heard a lot of wake surfers here say they are looking for a compromise with reasonable setbacks. I've seen Mr. Phillips' presentation at least once, maybe twice, and this one was right on cue, about 25 minutes. They shift the goalposts. They say, well, not that lake, go to a bigger lake. And then when they go to that bigger lake, they say, well, really a bigger lake. And then eventually they say, well, go to Lake Winnebago. It's a shifting of the goalposts. And it's not a proper balancing thing. Another thing he said was that riparian owners have no greater rights than the general public. The Wisconsin Supreme Court has already recognized greater rights for riparian owners, lake owners. It's a case from the 1960s. It's pretty well established law, so I don't know why he's trying to create some distinction that those that somehow live on the lake don't have an enhanced right to engage in boating. In this case from the 1960s, the Wisconsin Supreme Court was looking at a town ordinance that banned boating. And the Supreme Court said, quote, such riparian right, boating, is a substantial and valuable one for which compensation must be given if the owner is to be deprived of it. The ordinance in question, banning boating, is not within the limits of proper regulation, but is actually the taking of property without due process and without compensation. It violates the 14th Amendment of the Federal Constitution and the provisions of Section 13, Article 1 of the Wisconsin Constitution. End quote. Riparian owners have enhanced rights. If there's going to be a prohibition or a ban on riparian owners' abilities to use their wake boats safely and responsibly, that is an issue. Science also doesn't support this extreme ban. Attempts to regulate wake boats, quite frankly, are not supported by sound science. Looking at waves and impacts to shore. waves that are 200 feet from a wake boat, 200 feet from a wake boat will have the same or less energy as a wave from a Malibu response ski boat 100 feet from shore. A wake boat's wave after 200 feet has a similar height to, about 8 to 10 inches, and less energy than a wave from a 20-mile-an-hour wind that's gone 1 mile. The only difference between a 20-mile-an-hour wind and a wake boat is a 20-mile-an-hour wind lasts for hours and hours and pounds the shore. Research from McFarland back in 2018 indicates that even a fishing boat generates similar wave energy at 200 feet as many wake boats do. That's McFarland in 2018. That's before all this 2020, 2021, 2022 stuff with wake boats that we've seen come to the surface with the opposition.
I have a question. Sir, I have a question. On the wind, don't you feel that the wind is more of a topical surface issue compared to the boats that are going deeper? A huge difference there, right?
So I think you're mixing up two things. So every boat in 3 to 5 feet of water, every boat in 3 to 5 feet of water will disturb the lake bottom in some respects.
Hey, can I inject?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Any questions and answers we could do offline after the meeting? Just meet up with them. If you have questions.
Thank you.
I just wonder if you're getting close to the
So most, and you've heard about some wake boats that travel from lake to lake, but by and large here, the wake boats on the lakes in the town of Scott stay on a particular lake in the town of Scott. And this idea that AIS is spreading isn't supported by the facts here.
Oh, yes, it is.
Not,
Oh, yes.
the only one we heard about bringing a wake boat in, he chlorinates it and properly sanitizes it.
They have to do it when they enter the lake too.
Let them finish up, okay, and then we'll just continue on.
Stern drive boats, inboards, outboards, those the motors contain up to 4 quarts of water, which is double what a wake boat ballast system does. Do you know who's hopping from lake to lake to lake? The traditional boat, the fishing boat, the other stern drive. That's a potential threat. Last, this is a slippery slope. This regulation is a slippery slope to more regulation. Wake boats are first, and it's easy to pick on wake boats because they're big and scary, and whatever the ominous voice in the lakes video said. Ski boats are next, then fishing boats, then pontoon boats, especially those pontoon boats that pass within 100 feet of shore as you're sitting on your dock. If an inch is given, a mile will be taken here. And I have seen that in other municipalities, where Mr. Phillips gives his routine or presentation, towns eat it up, and then about a month later, you get the lake associations or the lake districts or the towns saying, let's ban all motor boats for just 1 day a week. You know it doesn't stop at just 1 day. It will continue, and it'll go further. Because the same reasoning they're using to ban wake boats, they could use to ban fishing boats. As a fisherman, that's an issue. So again, we think there are practical solutions to educate and address the perceived issues here. But this ordinance is overbroad and it's outright extreme ban. This is not the right way to do things in Wisconsin, especially northern Wisconsin. As someone who grew up on the highway, I mean, we're all able to find compromise. We'd request you don't engage in this outright prohibition that doesn't foster cooperation and goodwill. So thank you for all the time that you've had.
continue. We have a few more names on